On the day before Thanksgiving 1971, a man in a plain dark suit walked up to an airline counter in Portland, Oregon, paid $20 in cash for a one-way ticket to Seattle, and gave his name as Dan Cooper. A few hours later, he jumped out of the back of a Boeing 727 into a freezing rainstorm at night with $200,000 strapped to his body. And then, nothing. No body, no parachute, no arrest. Ever. More than 50 years later, this remains the only unsolved hijacking in the history of commercial aviation. The FBI investigated for 45 years, looked at over 800 suspects, and never figured out who he was. This is the full story of D.B. Cooper. Get comfortable. It's a good one. November 24th, 1971. Thanksgiving Eve. Here's the thing you need to understand about flying in 1971. There was no security, no metal detectors, no bag checks, no ID required. You walked up, paid cash, gave literally any name you wanted, and got on the plane, which is exactly what this man did. Witnesses described him as completely unremarkable. Mid-40s, around 6 feet tall, dark hair, business suit, white shirt, thin black clip-on tie, carrying a briefcase. The kind of guy you'd sit next to and forget existed. He boarded Northwest Orient Flight 305, a quick 30-minute hop to Seattle, took an aisle seat in the very back of the plane, lit a cigarette, and ordered a bourbon and soda. Shortly after takeoff, he handed a note to the flight attendant sitting nearest to him, a 23-year-old named Florence Schaffner. And here's a detail I love. She assumed it was just another lonely businessman passing her his phone number, so she dropped it in her purse without reading it. The man leaned over and said quietly, "Miss, you'd better look at that note. I have a bomb." The note said he had a bomb in his briefcase and wanted her to sit next to him. She did. He cracked the briefcase open just long enough for her to see red cylinders, wires, and a battery. Then he calmly laid out his demands: $200,000 in $20 bills, 4 parachutes, 2 main, 2 reserve, and a fuel truck waiting in Seattle. Then he did something genuinely smart. He took the note back. No handwriting, no fingerprints, no evidence. The pilots radioed Seattle. The FBI was notified mid-flight, and the president of Northwest Orient personally authorized the ransom. Pay the man, keep everyone safe. While banks in Seattle scrambled to pull together 10,000 $20 bills, every single serial number photographed first, the plane just circled over Puget Sound for about 2 hours. The other 36 passengers had no idea a hijacking was happening. They were told there was a minor mechanical issue. 36 people were sitting in a hijacked plane, mildly annoyed about a delay that didn't exist. Meanwhile, Cooper sat calmly in the back with flight attendant Tina Mucklow. By every account, he was polite. He wasn't nervous. He wasn't aggressive. At one point, he looked out the window and casually identified Tacoma below. This man knew the area. At 5:39 p.m., after dark, the plane finally landed in Seattle. Cooper had a taxi to an isolated, well-lit corner of the airport and ordered the window shades pulled down. He was thinking about snipers. An airline employee in street clothes delivered the cash and the parachutes. And Cooper kept his word. All 36 passengers walked free, plus 2 of the flight attendants. He kept the 2 pilots, the flight engineer and Tina Mucklow. Then he gave the crew his flight plan. And this is where it gets crazy. Fly to Mexico City. As slow as the plane can physically go. Below 10,000 feet, landing gear down, flaps lowered, cabin unpressurized. If you know anything about airplanes, that's a very specific set of instructions. That's a configuration for one thing and one thing only: jumping out. The plane took off into a rainstorm just after 7:30 p.m., with a refueling stop planned in Reno. Cooper sent Tina Mucklow up to the cockpit and told her to close the curtain behind her. She was the last person to ever see him. Around 8 p.m., a warning light showed the rear air stair had been opened. The 727 had a staircase that dropped down from the tail, and Cooper somehow knew it could be lowered mid-flight. Even the crew wasn't sure that was possible. At 8:13 p.m., the crew felt it. A sudden bump. The tail of the plane lifting. The FBI later recreated it by pushing a 200-pound sled off the same air stair of the same plane. Same bump. Same time signature. That was the moment D.B. Cooper stepped off the back of a moving jet. into pitch darkness, freezing rain, and a 200-mile-per-hour wind blast, over some of the most rugged wilderness in the Pacific Northwest, in a suit and loafers, with 21 pounds of cash tied to his body with parachute cord. When the plane landed in Reno, the crew opened the curtain. He was gone. The money was gone. The briefcase was gone. Even the ransom note, gone. All he left behind: two of the 4 parachutes, a few cigarette butts, and a black clip-on tie from JCPenney. Remember that tie? It's going to matter. The FBI launched one of the biggest investigations in its history. They called it NORJAC. They searched the projected drop zone near Ariel, Washington for weeks. Hundreds of troops, helicopters, boats, door-to-door searches. The FBI even got approval to fly an SR-71 Blackbird, the fastest spy plane ever built, along the flight path to photograph the terrain. They found nothing: no parachute, no money, no body. It was like the sky had swallowed him. Oh, and the name? He bought the ticket as Dan Cooper. Early in the investigation, police checked out a Portland man named D.B. Cooper, who had nothing to do with it. And a reporter ran with the wrong name. It stuck forever. The most famous alias in American crime is literally a typo. Then, 7 years later, a hunter found a placard in the woods. Instructions from a 727's rear air stair right along the flight path. And in February of 1980, the biggest break in the whole case. An 8-year-old boy named Brian Ingram was digging a fire pit on a Columbia River beach called Tina Bar when he uncovered 3 rotting bundles of $20 bills. $5,800, still in rubber bands. The FBI checked the serial numbers. It was Cooper's money. But instead of solving the case, it broke everyone's brain. The spot was miles away from the projected drop zone. How did it get there? Did he bury it? Did it wash down a river? Decades later, scientists analyzing microscopic algae on the bills concluded the money likely entered the water months after the hijacking, which raises a question nobody can answer. What was that money doing for those months? Of the $200,000, that $5,800 is the only cash ever found. Not one other bill has ever turned up. Anywhere. In 50 years. In 2016, after 45 years and a 66-volume case file, the FBI officially suspended the investigation. So, who was he? Let's go through the favorites. Theory 1, he didn't survive. A lot of FBI agents believed Cooper died that night. It was freezing. It was dark. He jumped into wilderness with no winter gear, and one of the 2 parachutes he took was a training chute that had been sewn shut. A dummy. And he apparently didn't notice. Skeptics say a skydiver with real experience would have caught that. Maybe he hit the ground and never got up. The problem? No body, no parachute, and no gear have ever been found, and that terrain has been searched a lot. Theory 2. Richard McCoy. 5 months after Cooper, a man named Richard McCoy Jr. hijacked a plane, demanded $500,000 and 4 parachutes, and jumped out over Utah. Sound familiar? McCoy was a Vietnam veteran and an expert skydiver. He got caught in 2 days, escaped prison, and died in a shootout with the FBI in 1974. The FBI ruled him out. Wrong age, wrong face, and his family says he was home for Thanksgiving dinner. But here's the twist. In recent years, McCoy's own children came forward with a parachute and a logbook found on the family property and handed it all over to the FBI. That thread is still being pulled today. Theory 3. The deathbed confession. In 1995, a Florida man named Dwayne Weber was dying. His wife says he pulled her close and said, "I am Dan Cooper." She had no idea what that meant. Then she started digging. Turns out her husband had a long criminal record, fake IDs, a knee injury he once claimed came from jumping out of a plane. And in 1979, he'd taken her on a trip to the Pacific Northwest, where he wandered down to the banks of the Columbia River. Right at Tina Bar, months before the money was found there. The FBI eventually ruled him out on fingerprints and DNA. But that story still keeps people up at night. Theory 4. The tie. Remember the clip-on tie he left on the seat? Decades later, researchers put it under an electron microscope and found over 100,000 microscopic particles on it, including rare metals like unalloyed titanium, which in 1971 basically only existed in one place: aerospace manufacturing. which suggests Cooper may have been an engineer or a manager at a plant connected to the aviation industry. Someone who wore a tie to work around exotic metals, knew planes inside and out, and maybe lost his job in the massive aerospace layoffs that hit Seattle in 1971. A desperate insider with nothing left to lose. Of every theory out there, this one might be the most quietly convincing. Whoever he was, D.B. Cooper hurt no one, took the money, and vanished so completely that 50 years of federal investigation couldn't find a single trace of him beyond a tie, a placard, and a kid's handful of rotten 20s on a riverbank. He also changed flying forever. Metal detectors, baggage screening, a lot of that traces back to this one Thanksgiving Eve. Boeing even added a device to the 727 to stop anyone from ever lowering those rear stairs in flight again. They call it the Cooper vein. Somewhere out there, there's an answer. Buried in the woods of Washington, or in a family's attic, or in a grave with a name we've all heard and dismissed. But until someone finds it, the man who stepped off the back of Flight 305 is still falling through history.